long ball. It's going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable. 45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome once again to the 1085 Gridiron Podcast. I am your host, Jack McCurry, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Anthony Joki. How's it going, man?
Oh, just fighting through some internet issues over here, but that ain't going to stop us from getting out here and talking Browns with all of you.
No, not at all. Thankfully, thanks to technology, we can do Skype over the phone, so we're able to do this. This is episode 86, and got a lot to discuss, so we are going to jump right in it. The Browns play the Atlanta Falcons this week, but before we get into that, there was some news off the field this week. The biggest news probably was that linebacker Christian Kirksey and cornerback E.J. Gaines are done for the season. They were both placed on injured reserve on Wednesday. Kirksey suffered a hamstring injury last week against the Chiefs, and Gaines unfortunately suffered his second concussion in 3 weeks. So obviously that's a blow to him because as talented as Gaines is, he just has been fighting with injuries his whole career, and especially here in Cleveland. He sprained his knee during preseason, and then, of course, the 2 concussions. So you have to wonder if his NFL future is on the line now. Anthony, about these injuries, what do you think this means to the Browns defense? Obviously, they have played a ton of football so far through 9 games, and obviously all those snaps are really piling up on these guys as the injuries are starting to happen at a high rate.
Yeah, this team could really use the bye week, and, it's coming here after Atlanta, and, they just need to really get healthy, and, losing Christian Kirksey, you could argue, one of your top 3 players on defense right now, and has been over the last few years. And, losing a team captain is never a good thing. And, this guy has been Mr. Consistent over the last few seasons, and to lose him on the defense is not going to be fun. They kind of made it work with Schobert out, but, losing Kirksey is a really big deal, and, losing Gaines as well. This secondary has been really thin recently. Last week, Denzel Ward went out, but it looked like he'll play this week. Randall didn't play. Mitchell's been out for a long period of time already. So this secondary is just so beat up, and to lose another guy in the secondary, we'll talk about the couple signings that they made, but, losing guys that have been here at the start of the season and continuing to lose guys, facing another top quarterback, it seems like we've hit the murderer's row when it comes to playing top quarterbacks recently. So, we need these guys, and it sucks that, we lost another person in our defensive secondary.
Yeah, definitely. And, with all the injuries in the secondary, the Browns were really active on the waiver wire this week. They claimed Phillip Gaines, who was just cut by the Buffalo Bills. He's a corner, and they also picked up Jermaine Whitehead, who is a safety/dime package linebacker. He was with the Green Bay Packers. He was there when Highsmith and Elliott Wolf were there, so obviously they vouched for him to John Dorsey to put in a waiver claim. And they also signed defensive back Justin Burris off the Jets practice squad. He was their 4th-round pick back in 2016, and he has 2 career interceptions. Anthony, when you look at this and you see that the Browns obviously knew that their secondary needed some depth just because of everybody hurt right now, any of these guys intrigue you right now?
Well, you look at The guy that came from Green Bay, obviously, Wolf and Highsmith are very familiar with him. Probably scouted him for the draft as well. So, bringing him in, it could be a long-term thing with him. As terms of the other two guys, they just need bodies at this point. We talked about last week, and we talked a little bit already today about the brutal path that the secondary has faced in terms of quarterbacks, in terms of injuries this season, and at this point you just need 11 guys out there, and probably 10 or so defensive backs for a game, and hopefully one of these guys pans out long term. Hopefully they all do, but I think at this point, we just need bodies for the rest of the season, and I'm not really expecting any of these three to really last past this season.
Yeah, I mean, Whitehead might, just because obviously Wolf and Highsmith were there in Green Bay and were there when he was picked up, and watched him as a player. He's been with the Packers the last couple seasons. Obviously, he was just cut on Tuesday after what happened Sunday night. I think he was ejected from the game for slapping the Patriots center in the face mask, and he was tossed from the game because of it. But like you said, they need bodies. Obviously, it's apparent that they needed to add some guys in the secondary. What I could tell you about Burris, the guy that picked up from the Jets practice squad, our buddy Joe Blewett, who was on with us prior to the Jets game, he breaks down film for the Jets. He told me this about Burris. He said he's got interesting athletic traits for his size, and he flashes good technique, but he's inconsistent with that technique. And then when he's playing against great athletes, he can't keep up. I reached out to Kevin Mazzari, who covers the Buffalo Bills. I asked him about Phillip Gaines, and he said that he's terrible, and he leads the league in penalty yards. So obviously, none of these guys are perfect. I don't think any Browns fan should expect these guys to come in and light the world on fire from day one. I think at this point they're just bodies. Maybe they can help us on special teams, but I wouldn't expect anything worthy of keeping them around probably past 2018.
Are you surprised that they cut Sidney Rice for these guys who I believe they drafted this year, correct?
Oh, Denzel Rice?
Yeah, Denzel Rice.
No, because Denzel really, he had that interception on Sunday against Kansas City. And other than that, he really didn't do anything in special teams. Nobody on special teams really has done anything worthwhile this year. It was a shock when he made the team over McKinnon, but obviously Rice is no longer here, neither is McKinnon. So I think they were willing to move on from Rice just because he wasn't doing anything worthwhile that, wanted the Browns to keep him. So obviously they're going to try with these new guys. There's 8 weeks left in the season, and I think it's apparent, obviously, that we need depth in the secondary. That was apparent at the beginning of the season. So we'll see how these guys turn out, but I wouldn't get my hopes up.
I appreciate you correcting me. I was really trying to throw back with Sidney Rice there for a second.
But with all the injury news, the Browns did get a good sign this week. Joe Schobert is back practicing. He practiced yesterday and he practiced today, so that's a good sign. Denzel Ward is practicing, and he said that the injury to his hip was much like the hip flexor that he suffered in minicamp, but he said he should be good to go. Jamie Collins, who I don't understand how he get hurt being lazy on the field, but he was limited with an ankle injury yesterday. He didn't practice today. He was limited. So other than that, I would expect everybody back that was either not active or got hurt during the game. They should all be good to go for Sunday against Atlanta.
You could almost argue that Jamie Collins wasn't active last week as well.
Touche. And the other big story off the field this week, credit to Mary Kay Cabot from Cleveland.com, the Haslams have reportedly given Dorsey the power to lead the coaching search. Anthony, do you believe that the Haslams have given Dorsey this authority, or do you think that they're still going to be running the show and they just put this out there for some good PR for once?
I think in terms of John Dorsey, this might have almost been a requirement of them hiring him, because Dorsey's going to want to run things his own way. I think you've seen that so far, and for Dorsey to come here, he's going to want to have his own head coach. And obviously the Hugh thing didn't work out. I think we all thought that Haley was going to be the interim guy if things went south with Hugh Jackson. And I think we were all pretty shocked that, Haley was let go along with you. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, with this coaching search. The Haslams have gotten it wrong the previous 3-4 times now, but they still need to be involved. I don't think they need to be, on the interviews or doing stuff like that. But when when you have owners running signing contracts and handing out money, there has to be some kind of say that they get in this. Now, how much say will they have? I guess we'll see. But I really think that this is, all on John Dorsey, and I think it was this is a requirement of him signing his contract to come here to be the GM of the Browns.
You would hope so. I mean, you look at it, Dorsey is well-established football executive. He has a great track record going back from, starting out as a scout in Green Bay, working his way up through that front office, and then obviously being the general manager alongside Andy Reid in Kansas City. He has a great track record. The Haslams obviously pursued him, and, with the help of Korn Ferry, which Mary Kay credits, the search firm that they used also to hire Hugh Jackson. So they know what Dorsey's going to bring to the table. It's good to see that they're going to let him go out and get his guy. Obviously, Dorsey's going to have to present his guy when he makes his decision to the Haslams and say, this is who I think is the best candidate to lead the Cleveland Browns in 2019 and beyond. And, obviously Dorsey's got a lot of resources behind him. He's got Elliott Wolf. He's got Highsmith. Mary Kay reported that he's also going to receive input from Dee Podesta, Andrew Berry. Obviously, they might use Ron Wolf in this situation. They also said Dorsey's got a great relationship with former Browns GM Ernie Accorsi. So Dorsey is obviously going to use his judgment, but I think he's got a lot of resources behind him that are going to help him in this search as well.
Yeah, he has a lot of resources, and being around the NFL as long as he has extensive knowledge of everybody and all the coaches. So I would imagine that whoever he decides to bring in here as a head coach, I think it's going to be the right guy. And, we all have our personal favorites of who we think that they should hire, and I wouldn't be surprised if one of those names that we have talked about so far is the guy that he brings in. We talked in our last episode about, I think we mentioned 6 to 8 guys, head coaches that could be here. So, look, it's really important that they get this right this time. I finally believe that they got it right with the general manager. You've seen just what in 1 year he's been able to do in terms of turning over his roster. Now it's his turn to go out and find the right head coach for his football team, find the right guy for the players that he drafted. And I think that it is going to be so telling in who he hires because, obviously you have a general manager who, drafts these guys, and he's going to want to find a coach that fits his same kind of style. So if he's able to do that and they're going to be on the same page from here on out, it's going to be absolutely wonderful for the Browns.
Definitely. One final note on Mary Kay Cabot's report. She says, the fact that Dorsey is conducting the search makes the job more attractive to some candidates leery of a job in which the last five head coaches have lasted 2.5 years or less. One NFL coach told Cleveland.com that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And, the expectations, I think, for next year are going to be relatively high. I mean, you'll have Baker Mayfield in his second year. You'll have Nick Chubb in his second year. You'll have another, hopefully, impactful draft class with Dorsey. They have a lot of cap money as well. So I think the expectations are going to be pretty high next year. It hasn't translated this year so far. I think the expectations got a little out of control this season. But when you go look at next season, and if the trend continues to go upward like it did this past all season, I think the expectations on who they bring in, they're going to be pretty high, and hopefully that head coach is up for it.
Yeah, definitely. I look at it like the situation for the Browns next year could be like the Chicago Bears this year. They got the quarterback in place. They had the GM in place. They went out this season, got the head coach, added some talent in the draft, pulled off a big trade to acquire a superstar defensive player like a Khalil Mack because they had the cap and the funds to go and do that, and also to pay him. And now they've taken off, and they're 5-3 right now, leading the NFC East. And I don't think anybody predicted that going into this season. So, the Browns have the talent now. They're going to have, I think, the last number I seen was $88 million in cap space. They're going to have another draft where they can add like 6 or 7 rookies, and you have these guys with another year under their belt. The Browns could be a team that takes off next year. So it'll be very interesting to watch what happens with this coaching search.
Absolutely. And I like I said, Dorsey is definitely going to get the right guy this time.
Yeah, definitely. But let's focus now towards the game. We have a game this Sunday. The Atlanta Falcons are rolling into town. They got off to a slow start. They were 1-4 after week 5, after they lost to Pittsburgh, got blown out 41-17. But now they've ripped off 3 straight wins. They beat Tampa, they beat the New York Giants, and then last week they beat the NFC leading Washington Redskins 38-14. So the Falcons are obviously red hot right now, and it's not a good time for the Browns. Obviously they're still transitioning into the Greg Williams era, so to speak. But last week we had to play Kansas City. Now we have to play the Falcons, who are a red hot team. Anthony, what's your expectations for this Sunday right now?
Well, you mentioned it. The Falcons are on a complete tear right now, and if you would have told me after 8 games that Julio Jones would have 1 touchdown and they're 4-4, I would have called you a damn liar. This Falcons team has so many different weapons. Look at what Calvin Ridley, their rookie, has been able to come in there and just completely gain instant chemistry with Matt Ryan. He has 6 touchdowns so far this year. Look, that receiving core that also has Mohamed Sanu on it to go along with Ridley and Julio Jones, obviously, and that's a tough matchup for sure. Obviously, they have good running backs too now. Is it Foreman? Has been hurt for
Freeman.
For Freeman, I for some reason I get the Freeman and Foreman confused, but Freeman has been hurt quite often this season, and it doesn't look he's not be playing this Sunday. But they still have 2 other good backs as well, and they have complete balance in offense. And when you have a player like Matt Ryan that's able to distribute the football as well as he does, it's going to be a tough matchup. And they have a good offensive line too. Obviously they have Alex Mack there at center, and they have some other tough linemen as well. And look, this offense, them being 1-4, we all know that. We all knew at that point that they were way better than that, and obviously over the last few weeks they've proved that. And this matchup this week is going to be very tough, especially with how banged up our secondary is covering or trying to cover, Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley and among others on that roster. And it's going to be a very tough matchup, and hopefully the secondary is up for a challenge because they're going to have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look Matt Ryan. We'll just start off with him. He won MVP 2 years ago, got the Falcons to the Super Bowl. They were up 28-3, and we all know what happened after that. But, this season, he's on pace to have even a better season than that MVP season. Right now, through 8 games, he's completed almost 71% of his passes, has almost 2,700 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 3 picks. I mean, we all thought maybe he would take a dip once Kyle Shanahan left to take the 49ers job, but obviously their new offensive coordinator, well, he's been their offensive coordinator since Shanahan left, Steve Sarkisian. He's brought that Atlanta Falcons offense back, and obviously there's a ton of talent around him, but Matt Ryan is definitely one of the top 10 quarterbacks in this league, and he's looking like he could be up for MVP again, but obviously Mahomes, among others, could be in Ryan's way for that.
Yeah, and, if Mahomes wasn't having as ridiculous of a year as he has, I'd probably put my money on Matt Ryan. I mean, yeah, they're only 4-4, but, when you look at his body of work that he's done this season, I mean, 71% completion percentage, that's absolutely ridiculous. The touchdown to interception ratio, 19-3, that's just awesome for a quarterback. And, obviously we know he's good. We all, being a former MVP, he should win multiple MVPs by the time he's done. Hopefully he can get a Super Bowl. He should have had one a couple years ago, but like you said, we all know how that turned out. But, he's definitely a top 10, top 5 quarterback in this league, and it's going to be a really tough matchup.
Yeah, and you touched on the weapons around him, but looking at the running game, obviously Devontae Freeman's down, probably won't be back this season. Tevin Coleman stepped up, has been productive not only as a runner but as a receiver. And then they drafted a rookie, Ito Smith, in the 4th round this year out of Southern Miss. Something about them Southern Miss boys, him and Nick Mullins are, turning heads in the National Football League so far this year. They're obviously bringing the running game. And then you look at the receivers. We mentioned Jones and Ridley, but you got to praise Mohamed Sanu, who, left Cincinnati when Hugh Jackson left. We all thought he might have been a potential target for the Browns. He ended up going to Atlanta. He's been productive for Ryan. Austin Hooper's emerged as a viable option at the tight end position. And then they also have guys on the bottom of their depth chart, Justin Hardy and Marvin Hall, who Marvin Hall's been primarily their return guy. But if Jones or Ridley were to go down with injury, I think one of those guys could step up in the receiving game as well and produce.
Yeah, I mean, they have weapons on weapons on weapons down there in Atlanta, and they're all coming for this Sunday. And obviously, it's been talked about repeatedly already, the depleted secondary that we have, and the challenge is absolutely there, and hopefully these guys are up for it.
Yeah, I mean, with Denzel Ward's hip injury, I wouldn't put him right now on Julio Jones just because Julio is killing receivers right now, but so is Ridley. But I think Ridley's not as quick as Julio Jones. So I think right now, for all intents and purposes this Sunday, just to keep Denzel Ward somewhat healthy, if I'm the Browns, I would put Ward on Ridley most of the time, maybe put him on Sanu in some packages, and then you have to figure out a way to stop Julio. Obviously, they'll probably put Ward on Jones just because of how dynamic he is, but I wouldn't try to re-aggravate that hip injury too much because you got to think long-term, obviously, for our second number 1 pick.
Well, do you think that they could go to more of a zone defense just so that way, you mentioned that Ward isn't on Julio the majority of the time. That way they kind of spread out, the coverages here.
Yeah, definitely. Or you look to, putting Bodie Calhoun and Randall on Jones, or, obviously they're probably going to look to pin or put Peppers or Kindred or those guys back deep just to avoid the deep vertical attack by those guys, because obviously Jones and Ridley can get down the field and they will burn you. So Greg Williams and his defensive staff are going to have to come in with a really strong game plan to try to stop these guys.
And I think we saw it a little bit last week. Once the injuries started to pile up a little more with Denzel being out, you saw Peppers and Kendrick kind of creep back to that 20, 25 yards that we were all complaining about last year. And I think that's just Williams' way of not wanting to get beat deep. Obviously Mahomes that has a rocket for an arm and, can easily throw it over their heads. But I hopefully if the health is fine with Denzel, we won't see too much of that. But if the injuries continue to pile up on Sunday, you're probably going to see more of that.
Yeah. We're going to switch over to the defensive side of the ball now. Atlanta's defense has struggled big time. Luckily, their offense has been dominant enough to keep them in games, and that's obviously been a trend, I think, so far throughout the National Football League this year, where these defenses are a bend but don't break, and offenses have helped out in terms of scoring points. For the Browns, it hasn't been that case. They've given up points but haven't been able to keep up scoring-wise. The Falcons have lost a ton of players. They lost Ricardo Allen. They lost Keanu Neal. Deion Jones are all on injured reserve. But this defense does have some players. There's no doubt about it. Tack McKinley, who was their number one pick last year, he's leading the team with 6 sacks. They still have Desmond Trufant. They still have DeMonte Casey, who is leading the team with 4 picks. And they just signed Bruce Irvin, who already played the Browns once this year when he was with Oakland, and he had a sack. And they also have Grady Jarrett, who's a pretty good defensive tackle. So while the defense is struggling in terms of numbers, they're still a talented group.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be kind of like last week with Kansas City. There's talent on the Kansas City defense, but just with the amount of injuries that have piled up, with Kansas City and now with Atlanta on defense, obviously things are not going to be what they want it to be. Obviously, Dan Quinn's a very defensive-oriented coach. And, he has a system that's worked very well down there in Atlanta and worked with the Seahawks before. So, I kind of expect the same out of the Browns offense this week as I did last week. The Browns are going to be able to move the football. They're just going to have to cash in. You saw opportunities early in the game last week against Kansas City where they weren't able to cash in. And ultimately, when you're playing a team like Kansas City, and now Atlanta that has the ability to score pretty much at will, you're going to have to cash in on those opportunities. And Atlanta's defense, while they have good players, they're going to give you some opportunities. And the Browns are going to have to cash in on those.
Before we go to our last topic, let's go ahead and make our predictions. Anthony, I'm going to give you the floor first. What's your prediction for Sunday against Atlanta?
Oh, this is going to be tough. One of these games this year, the Browns are going to win one of those that they're not supposed to win. I don't think it's going to be this one. I think Atlanta's on such a tear right now that they're just going to come in here on Sunday and continue to steamroll people and get their 4th win in a row. So I'm going to say Atlanta 37, Browns 27.
Yeah, I also expect Atlanta to win this game. Obviously, they're red hot. The Browns are, trying to establish a new identity down the stretch with the interim head coach, new offensive coordinator. I expect them to be productive on offense, but, defensively with the injuries, although Ward will be back, Randall will be back, Schobert will be back. The secondary is obviously a concern, with the injuries starting to pile up, and they're obviously bringing in new bodies. I'm going to go right around the same score as you. I'm going to say Atlanta 38, Cleveland 24.
Yeah, I think it's going to be another tough one this Sunday, and the Browns will lose their 5th in a row, 6th in a row at this point.
It's starting to pile up, and it's just another typical Cleveland Browns season.
Yeah, definitely, and it sucks, but it is what it is.
Yeah. Before we get on out of here, we're recording this on November 8th, and if you're a Browns fan, if you've seen it on social media, if you've seen it on the news, this is a historic day in Browns history. 25 years ago today, November 8th, 1993, the Cleveland Browns cut Bernie Kosar, and it's a move that's obviously still talked about to this day just because of the historic context of it and what happened in the weeks, the months, the years after it. And obviously 25 years later, it's being rehashed just because it's a high number anniversary. Obviously, me and Anthony, we don't remember that because when it happened, we were babies. I was just turned a year old the month before that. Anthony, how old were you in 1993?
I was 2.5
Yeah.
when this happened.
So we don't remember that. I don't remember the move that obviously happened a couple years after that. Anthony might because he was a little older than I am. But, when you talk about Bernie getting cut, obviously the whole context of it was Bill Belichick and him were clashing. Bernie was obviously a beaten up quarterback at that time. He was dealing with elbow and ankle injuries. He broke his ankle twice in the 1992 season, and the Browns went ahead and signed Vinny Testaverde as a free agent, and they were going back and forth with the quarterbacks. And then the day before, the Browns played the Broncos, and Bernie was freelancing, and he drew up a play in the dirt, which obviously was his last touchdown. It was a 40-yard touchdown pass to Michael Jackson. And then after the game and the morning after, the organization huddled up and decided to cut Bernie, and it was a bad move. The fans backlashed against them. I mean, Anthony, could you imagine what Twitter would have been like 25 years ago if we were around and the Browns cut Bernie Kosar?
It would almost be the equivalent of in the middle of last NBA season, the Cavs just went out and cut LeBron James. I mean, Bernie was that big here in Cleveland, and he was the Browns. I was talking to my dad about it a little bit today, and he has his theories on what he thinks happened. He thinks that this move was calculated by Modell more than Belichick in terms of getting Bernie out of here. But to cut the franchise guy in the middle of the season, that's just brutal. And like I said, it would have compared to LeBron getting cut in the middle of last season and the meltdown. And, if Twitter wasn't around back then, it would have been ugly. I would just kind of open the Twitter app and watch it and just let it burn because that's what it would have done 25 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's been around, I think, like 10 years or so. The one moment that I thought Twitter exploded in terms of a Browns fan was when we fired Chudzinski in 2013. I can remember, it came out during the game that they were going to make a coaching change. And then, just watching Twitter during and after the game, everybody was going off. And it was just, crazy moment. But, looking back on it now, obviously we weren't around at the time. Knowing what you know, do you think Belichick and Modell made the right decision at the time, cutting Bernie Kosar?
No, I don't. I mean, at that time, they were still 5-3. Obviously, Testaverde was still hurt and probably wasn't going to play the rest of the season. But if Bernie sticks around, they might make the playoffs in that season. I know I think they finished 7-9 that year. So, in terms of a pure football move, I think it was a bad choice. Now, I'll get into my dad's theory a little bit here. He thinks it was obviously he thought Modell did move the team, obviously, and he thinks that this was a move to, maybe make the team less popular, drive down attendance, kind of like the major league theory, get guys in there that you don't know who they are and drive down attendance so you can move the team. And I don't know if it gets to that level, but in terms of a pure football move, it was just a bad move based on where they were in the season. Obviously, the guy that came in didn't do much. Was it Todd Philcox?
Yeah.
I think that was his name. Obviously, he didn't come in and do much. So, if you would have played Bernie the rest of the year, who knows? You might have made the playoffs in that season, but obviously they didn't, and the rest is history.
Yeah, obviously the rest is history. And that started like the beginning of the end for Belichick. Like people were chanting "Bill must go." Obviously, Cleveland did not give Belichick a fair shake, and obviously he didn't do things right. He shut off the media. He was typical Bill Belichick. That was just the young one preparing himself for what was going to happen now in New England, where he gives these famous like one-liners. When you look at Kosar though, his legacy as a Brown. Do people tend to overrate him? I know today Tony Rizzo said that Bernie Kosar was our Peyton Manning. And, while Bernie was good, I don't think Bernie wasn't an elite quarterback. He was a good quarterback for that era of the NFL. Obviously, he was one of the top AFC quarterbacks. He took the Browns to 3 AFC title games in a 4-year span. But I think people tend to overrate him just because the Browns haven't had a quarterback since him. I mean, we're hopeful for Baker, but I do think people tend to overrate Bernie just a tad.
I don't know if it's overrating him. I think it's more so, getting to 3 AFC championship games. I think, obviously not making the Super Bowl. We know what happened in those 3 years of them not making it, but getting that close, I think is why, Bernie is so appreciated. You look at his stats, they're not terrible. I would say they're above average. I'm not here to slander Bernie at all, but I think he was a very good quarterback. He wasn't the best in Browns history. That probably goes to Otto Graham, but Bernie, by far, being the face of the Browns for so long, through those good teams, being the guy that had 17 game-winning drives and fourth-quarter comebacks, or that number's combined for those two things I said there. But having those kinds of stats and whatnot, I wouldn't say he's overrated by any means.
Yeah, but I also get it why people kind of praise him so much. He was from here. He chose to come back home and quarterback the Browns, and he got them almost to the pinnacle of 3 Super Bowls, which, I mean, if he would have won one of those, it would have cemented his legacy in Cleveland forever. Obviously, and I wrote about this Thursday morning on my website, he's the second most popular athlete in Cleveland sports history, behind only LeBron. And I think if he would have won a Super Bowl, it would have been a great debate, LeBron versus Bernie in terms of popularity, just because obviously LeBron got the title here, but if Bernie would have won a Super Bowl, it would have been a great debate between the two as to who was more popular and more beloved.
If Bernie would have won the Super Bowl with the Browns, he would absolutely be more beloved than LeBron was. And, Bernie was LeBron before LeBron. He was that big in Cleveland. Just hearing some of the stories from my dad about it. He was. My dad was pissed that day that they cut him, and it sucks. And but for sure, Bernie would have been the more popular guy if he would have won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, definitely. And, we're talking about Bernie. We talk about Baker hopefully being the next franchise quarterback of the Browns. And the website Spotrac, which they are like the go-to website in terms of, contracts. If you want to know what a player's making, what their bonuses are and all that. They tweeted out this fact this Thursday morning on Twitter that says, who was the last quarterback to be drafted by each team and then tendered a second contract to stay, and that includes franchise tags. For the Browns, they said it's Brian Sipe in 1972, which is crazy because it's been almost 50 years. But our buddy Stephen Thomas did point out that they were wrong because we did draft Bernie Kosar in the 85 supplemental draft, and he did go on to sign a second and I think a third contract. But still, it's been a long damn time for the Browns to get a quarterback to their second contract. So we're hoping and praying that Baker is that guy.
Absolutely. And, Tim Couch was pretty close to making that list. I think he left after his rookie deal was up. I think they just decided not to re-sign him at that point. But, look, I think when you look at Baker Mayfield, he has all the tools to be a franchise guy. This one feels different than all the other quarterbacks that we've taken since '99, at least since I've been watching. And I'm pretty confident that Baker is absolutely making it to his second contract here.
Yeah, we really hope so. Anthony, before we get on out of here, go ahead and plug everything you got going on your end.
Yeah, obviously you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and on Facebook at 1085 Gridiron. You can find our podcasts on any platform that you can think of, including iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio. Be sure to subscribe, review, and rate our podcast. We'd absolutely appreciate it. And go ahead, Jack.
I'm going to make another plug for you. If you guys follow Browns Film Breakdown, which our buddy Jake Burns runs, and you see those sweet graphics at Browns Film BDN, Mr. Joki's the one that makes them up. So I plug that for you too, buddy. So
I appreciate that.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle. You can check out my website, thenorthcoastsports.com, for all the latest on Cleveland sports. It's a busy time right now, obviously, with the Cavs struggling, the Indians off-season ramping up, and, of course, the Browns season as we wind down here through the remaining 7 games. So go check out that website. Also check out the other podcast myself and Anthony do, the North Coast Sportscast. We hope to get a new episode to you guys out soon. It's been a few weeks since we have, but go check that out. Follow us on Twitter at NC Sportscast. We're available on any podcast platform. And with that, as always, as we get on out of here, go Browns.